Hey, everybody. My guest today is Joseph Tsang, and we're going to talk about the migrant crisis in New York. All right, Joseph, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph. I'm an immigration lawyer here in California. So today we're talking about the migrant crisis in New York, but it's actually not just a migrant crisis in New York. It's really across America. It's just the biggest spotlight on the news is in New York, but that's because Texas is sending everybody to New York. But generally speaking, it is a big problem, which we can all talk about. I'm an immigration law specialist. I practice immigration law. I've been doing it for 10 plus years. Our family has been doing it for, maybe 30 years. And I actually go down to Mexico almost on a monthly basis dealing with some of these problems. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about this. And so feel free to let me know if you have any questions.
And for those of you who don't know, Joseph and I are childhood friends. We grew up across the street from each other. And it's just been great that, we've kept in touch all these years. Well, why don't you give kind of like the background of this crisis? Well, first of all, what is this crisis? And second, like what caused this crisis?
So let's put the word crisis in perspective first. The crisis is not that people are showing up at our southern border claiming asylum and trying to flee persecution. That has been going on since the dawn of history, right? What makes it a crisis now is that the numbers are peaking, right? It's going way above 2.5 million people on an annual basis. And to put that in perspective, that is more people crossing the border, claiming asylum, seeking refuge, and that population is greater than 3 states combined, 3 of the least populous states in the U.S., but combined, okay? It's pretty much the entire city of Chicago in 1 year, just that many people coming in. So that's what makes it a crisis. Other things that make it a crisis is that it's flooding the system, like our internal, local, state, and federal system, nonprofit, for-profit. We can't handle this amount of people. If we could, it wouldn't be that big of a crisis. If it was, lower numbers than what's always been going on, it wouldn't be that big of a crisis. But the only reason it's a crisis now is because the system itself cannot handle it. So I just want to put that in perspective. And the second thing is what you see on the news on how there's such a great amount of migrants in New York and other places. It's because Texas, where most of these migrants are coming in, the governor in Texas is shipping them by bus and by plane to various parts. Now, they've concentrated it in New York, right? So they predominantly sent most of the migrants to New York to flood the New York system. And a lot of it is for to make a political statement, right? Democrats, generally speaking, especially sanctuary cities, especially New York, they have very generous laws for these migrants. And they have a lot of nonprofits and a lot of things that is set up to help these migrants. But Texas doesn't want that. But yet they are suffering from the blunt of this crisis of the number of people flooding into Texas. So Texas is saying, well, if these are your law, your policies that you voted into place, why should we suffer from it? And so they sent them out. Right or wrong, that is something that we can, thoroughly discuss. But that kind of lays out the groundwork of what the situation is in America right now, right? Every single day, thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are coming in seeking refuge, seeking protection, fleeing persecution. And us as a country, we want to house them, we want to protect them. But who should do that? And how should we fix it? So that's kind of the groundwork for the migrant crisis.
The migrants that are coming over, are they asylum seekers?
Most of them are. So they're mostly fleeing persecution. They're mostly fleeing their country. And that's what the asylum law grants. When you come in, you can seek refuge. And the laws that we have in place that is, created pretty much since World War II, we don't want to turn away anyone who is fleeing persecution.
Okay. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding of like the logistics of this. So you have these migrants who are crossing the border illegally, basically, right? Like they're not crossing in particular crossing points. Maybe they're just crossing over where there's like a gap where they're able to cross, and then they get picked up by Border Patrol, and then they just get collected into these buses and planes, and then they get shipped to New York and other sanctuary cities. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, yes, but I wouldn't use the word illegal, right? They're crossing illegally because asylum law allows for people to cross and seek asylum. So by just crossing and claiming asylum, that is permissible. So, but that is in itself the legal way. Now, some people might fight back saying, well, no, that's not technically true because to make things more efficient, we created a line, we created an app, and you're supposed to wait in line and fill out this form and wait your turn. But that is more so like a process by which for the government to function to create a better flow. But that's not necessarily the law for asylum.
I see. Okay, so if you cross the border and you're seeking asylum and you verbally state, I'm here to seek asylum, you did not break a law.
You did not break a law.
Wow.
You are not complying with the process, like to make it as efficient as possible, right? There's hundreds of thousands of people before you. You should just wait your turn, stay in Mexico, stay in your home country while we review your paperwork. Then we will process you. I mean, that's very convenient for the U.S. government to create these processes, but that's not necessarily the asylum international law, right? If you're fleeing persecution, you show up, just put yourself back into World War II, right? And because that's when a lot of the asylum laws were enacted, pretty much at that time and thereafter. So imagine what was going on. Are you going to make somebody who's fleeing the Nazis say, you know what, just wait in Germany a little bit while we, process your application and do a background check. Oh, did you submit your birth certificate? Go back and get it notarized, right? That doesn't make sense. If somebody shows up at your door, they're fleeing persecution, you let them in. At least that's the humanitarian law that we've enacted.
All the people who refer to these migrants as like illegals or they're illegally coming over, that's just false.
That's a very hotly contentious situation. So what makes things worse is they are claiming asylum, but that doesn't mean they're granted asylum, right? So until the point where you're granted, you are just claiming it. And what if your claim is false? What if you are a spy from a different country? What if you are just pretending you are fleeing persecution? And the problem is our system right now, and has been for a long time, is so broken that we don't have enough people and process to review all the applications. So an asylum application can run on for years, and I would say decades. So for decades, whether you are illegal or not illegal, it depends on the outcome of your asylum application. So if after 10 years, we discovered that you really were fleeing persecution, okay, well then you did it the legal way, kind of, right? But what if you were a fake, right? You just said it, like, somebody was persecuting me because of my race, my ethnicity, my religion. But then it turns out you just wanted to be here and make some money and then you want to go back. So you're just using it the quickest way to get a work permit. Well, then you are illegal. But who knows that? Well, you only know it in the end. But the process itself is so long that, because we just don't have enough resources as a government on a federal, state, and local level. So, I mean, this situation is very, very complicated. That's why it's important to kind of spell everything out,
Okay, so until the outcome is determined, these migrants, their legal status is in limbo.
Their legal status is in limbo in a sense of whether or not your claim is right or wrong. But to alleviate the major problem, they can't just be here starving on the streets. So the United States government grants them a legal status to temporarily wait for essentially trial or adjudication. And they also grant them a work permit so that they can work. That is the theory, but the work permit itself is taking so long to adjudicate. They might not be able to work legally for maybe a year or longer. And so they come in, they claim asylum, they cannot legally work. They have to rely on the good graces of good neighbors all around them, nonprofit organization, taxpayer money to support them just so they can eat and survive, right? If their children is sick, so the hospitals can care for them, they could get medicine and shelter. So the work permit itself is that long. And just because you're granted work permit, does that mean you'll immediately find a job? No, right? The government is not there to find you a job. You have to go to the marketplace just like everybody else to find for a job. But what if you can't speak English? What if you're disabled? What if, you have to care for your young ones because you fled persecution? Who's going to hire you? If you don't have that many people seeking refuge, and you have a great country with tons of people and tons of nonprofit organizations able to support, that's probably not going to be that big of a problem. But when you have 2 million plus, and the numbers are increasing at a very rapid pace, and the system itself is already flooded, and you have Democrats and you have Republican states, they're not on the same page. That is what's causing the crisis at the border.
Okay, there was a lot there. I kind of want to break it down a little bit. So one thing that you said is that there are numerous practical obstacles, okay, to get this done efficiently. Okay, and one thing that you mentioned is that these asylum cases can go on for decades, right? And is that because we're just trying to determine if this person truly is trying to escape persecution?
Right. So who can actually decide their asylum claim? You need an immigration judge. Well, how many judges do we have, right? And do we have enough to kind of review 2 million cases a year? No way, right? And we're already backlogged because of all the people who were seeking asylum in the prior years. And so that's one big problem. We don't have enough federal agency and immigration judges to do it. You can't just have, any 20-year-old who just graduated college with like 2-week training to adjudicate these claims.
The other thing that you mentioned is that when these migrants cross the border seeking asylum, you said that the government has certain processes in place to try to take care of them, right? So they can be recipients of some sort of welfare system. Is that correct?
They can be part of some, but there's many that they are not a part of as well. And also, the system itself is very broken in the sense that it's very capitalistic, in the sense that it's not like a one-stop shop that completely takes care of them. They come in and they seek asylum, and a CBP officer, a customs officer who says, okay, you're seeking asylum, let me take your information. Okay, I have you in the queue. I have you in a log. Now go into the wild. That's sort of the situation. So a lot of these asylum seekers, they are like completely dumbfounded. Like, I came to this great country and I'm seeking asylum, and then now I'm just left in the desert to like die, because nobody is taking care of them. And then especially if they are in a place that's hostile to them, right? Like, let's say there's in Texas and Texas doesn't want them, and then they get shipped, hundreds and hundreds of miles everywhere, and also separated from their children, their spouse. They don't speak the language, and they're just on the streets and nobody's helping them. And only by luck do they find somebody who knows something to put them in a shelter, to get some food. And it's just like completely bizarre. There is no like one place that will give them food, shelter, a job, do a background check. They're literally just in the wild.
Okay. And then the other thing that you talked about was a work permit. You're saying that the government does give these migrants work permits, but I thought part of the crisis was that they were not getting work permits, and that's why they were just all on the street.
Because work permits take so long to adjudicate. So when you apply for an asylum claim, then the first thing the government is supposed to do is to do a basic check, and then to grant you a work permit so that you can work and live while they continue to adjudicate your asylum claim. Now, after however long they prepare it, then you have a preliminary hearing, and then you have a final merits hearing. But all of that could take an extremely long time. And just the work permit itself is already backlogged. And the work permit backlog for asylum seekers is not just asylum seekers. The work permit backlog is across the board for all immigrants. So you can think of executives from major companies coming from abroad. Their work permits are backlogged. People who invested millions of dollars into the United States try to get like a golden green card. Those work permits are backlogged. People who marry U.S. citizens, work permits are backlogged. It's a backlog across the board, and it's compounded by several other crises, right? Afghanistan was a major crisis that we had to deal with. We're still suffering from that because suddenly there was an influx of hundreds of thousands of people that the government had to process. Of course, the Ukraine and also Israel situation, those all put an undue amount of caseload and work for the United States Citizenship Immigration Services, where they have to process all of these things all at once, while they already had a hiring freeze and they cannot ramp up people fast enough. So it's very much a practical problem, but it's been going on for years. And so it's in a crisis in that sense that they just cannot process.
And I'm wondering if it's the practical problems that are leading to like this political disagreement, right? So maybe Texas would be welcoming to immigrants if there weren't such a backlog and if everything didn't take so long.
That's true, but it's political reasons that lead to practical reasons that lead to more political reasons, right? It's like a fundamental attitude and belief about how you should run this country. And so the Republicans under Donald Trump froze a lot of the hiring practices, and pretty much USCIS was almost going to go bankrupt. Now, there's all sorts of reasons that go into that, right? Because maybe they didn't increase the filing fees enough. Maybe they were rejecting too many cases. Maybe there was all sorts of things that contributed to why President Trump at the time decided what he did, right? Quadrupling the number of interviews. Well, if you have to do 4 times more interviews and you get to collect the same amount of fee and you don't have new hires and everybody's quitting, well, of course your organization is going to go bankrupt, right? And so things are definitely get longer. So it completely depends on what your attitude and what your beliefs are on how immigration should be run. And so so we're kind of seeing the fallout from back then, and there's other issues as well that's happened that led to this kind of crisis. But yes, if the United States had ample supply of nonprofit organizations and federal, state, and local level, and plenty of immigration lawyers and immigration agencies that's able to help all of these migrants, then it wouldn't be a crisis. But we are literally breaking at the seam at every single level.
The other thing that you talked about was sanctuary cities, and I've heard of that term as well. Can you explain what that is?
Basically, these are certain cities, and predominantly New York and Los Angeles, that favor immigrants. And so the laws that are put in place from a local, state level is significantly better than other non-sanctuary cities. And the whole idea is, think of like a police that stops you. Whether or not the police is going to ask for more documentation, and if they have a reasonable doubt that you do not have status, are they going to report you to the federal agencies to deport you? That's kind of like the idea, right? And so in sanctuary cities, an illegal immigrant or the undocumented immigrant or an immigrant who's in that gray zone, they are relatively fine. They can live their life because unless they commit a major crime of some sort, generally nobody is going to go try to deport you. But once you do commit a major crime, and even like a DUI is almost considered a major crime, that is a threat to the safety of others, then immigration authorities are alerted that they can go after you. Whereas other cities, if somebody finds out you are illegal, undocumented, they might directly call authorities and you just might immediately get harassed, right, and thrown in court.
I see. So it just refers to cities that are, I guess, more immigration friendly.
That's right. For undocumented, illegal asylum seekers.
Well, what's confusing to me is that I know that there's the federal level and there's like the state level stuff, right? You're saying on the federal level, the government has to provide certain services to these asylum seekers, okay? But if Texas can just ship them out of the state, then that tells me that they actually don't have to provide services, or at least more services other than transportation.
Are you talking about Texas or are you talking about federal?
So I guess I'm trying to understand what is on the federal level and what's on the state level, how much freedom states have to, to provide and help these migrants, right? Because you're saying, it sounded like you were saying that on the federal level that the government has to provide these certain services to these asylum seekers, right? But it looks like on the state level, they don't really have to do that if what they can do is just ship them out of the state.
Okay, I understand. On a federal level, there's very little assistance given. So other than a work permit, other than granting the green card, and once you have a work permit, then you're able to lawfully work and do other things. And then once you get a green card, then you can get access to more services. But until you get a green card, and if it takes a decade to adjudicate, then for a decade, you don't get a lot of the benefits. Now, you can get some benefits, but it's not completely like a U.S. citizen homeless person will have far more benefits than a refugee seeker. Okay, and so they will have access to far more state, local, and federal level support. But if you are an asylum seeker, if you're undocumented, the amount of charity that is given to you is much more restricted. So federal level actually doesn't give that much. And so that was the major contention between Texas and the federal government, in the sense that, well, if millions of people are flooding into my door on my doorstep, well, I have a responsibility to block that door. You're trespassing into my territory. And so that there was that big fight. And of course, the federal government says, no, they're coming into the United States. So you do not have jurisdiction. They can come. And then the governor, right, Greg Abbott, said, well, if I cannot stop them from coming in, the least that I could do is ship them out, right? If you want them in, well, then you take them. And again, there is no federal land in a sense, right? It's multiple states. Our federal political system is a theory in the sense that it's created. So where do they go? They go to another state, right? And so Texas ships them over to New York. Like, you guys like migrants, you guys have sanctuary cities, you have great laws, then here, take care of them. And now New York is completely overwhelmed. They're trying to deal with it the best they can, but it is pretty serious.
Okay, doesn't New York also have a law that says that they have to take care of homeless people or take care of migrants or something like that? Like, that's part of the reason why they're a sanctuary city, but that's also part of the reason why there's a crisis there.
Right, because just completely running out of shelters. And now, because of the law that's in place, now they're paying hotel fees for these migrants, and everybody else. But it's like that's why it's kind of breaking under that system.
And only the federal government can grant work permits. It can't be done on a state level.
That's correct. All immigration status it goes through the federal government first, and then there is no necessary like work permit from a state to state level. Now, state to states have their own DMVs that can issue driver's license in a certain way. And so for certain states, if you do not have a green card, if you do not have legal status, we're not going to give you a driver's license. And if you don't have a driver's license, you can't get a lot of things. Whereas in sanctuary cities, well, even if you're illegal, as long as you're here, we could give you a driver's license, right?
Okay. All right, so I think we did a good job kind of like laying out what the problem is. What do you think is the solution?
That is really hard. That is so hard. One of the first things is we need to get a control of the situation. That's first and foremost. The analogy is, imagine just 2 million people is right outside your house, and they're storming in. And it's not even you can decide or not. They're literally coming in and going out, right? This is already happening. And we just don't have a full control of the border. So that's something that everybody will agree on. We need to get a control of the situation, have a good assessment, and we need to just immediately solve that problem first. How to decrease the number of people that are continually going in, basically control the crisis, that there's a lot of talk and a lot of theories and a lot of suggestions that have all been proposed, right? And so if you increased the welfare in a lot of these other countries, maybe there wouldn't be so much migrants that are fleeing. If you improve the asylum process and help everybody get work permits faster and get green cards faster, then that might help the situation. If there's more federal support at the local and state level, because the federal government doesn't actually do that much to support the local and state to deal with these, increased migrants when they are suffering from the blunt of it in the housing crisis. And, they might talk about crime rate and whatnot, but generally speaking, from all the statistics that I've read, it doesn't, it's these migrants are not really causing crime. They might be a victim of crime. They're far more likely to be a victim of crime because they're so vulnerable. And then when they're victims of crime, well, then crime rate goes up. But they're not the perpetrators of crime, right? That's a very interesting thing that we could talk about later on as well. But generally speaking, these migrants come in, they get work permits, they work, they do good work, they pay taxes without getting benefits because they can't. And local businesses thrive, economies it gets better, and overall, the statistic shows that the number of migrants and refugees and asylum and immigrants in general really help the U.S. economy. However, even if that's true, right? Well, I believe it's true, and there's all the statistics that back it up. When you have a spike of 2 million people coming in all at once, it might actually cause chaos, right? And so getting control of the border, having a better process, and it just has to be a multifaceted solution from the federal, state, local level, right? Empowering the local communities, churches, nonprofit organizations, immigration practitioners to help them improving the CBP. They have been on a hiring frenzy, but they still can't get enough people to support the border issue. And also globally, right? Why are all these people in other places around the world storming into the U.S., fleeing persecution, right? Can the U.S. help on the foreign policy front and help more? And that's what Mexico has been saying, and that's what other countries have been saying. And just so you have a clear picture, it's not just Mexicans coming in, right? They're going through Mexico, but it's Mexico, Venezuela, there's Honduras, and then that population is only like about 50%, and the other 50% is from all countries from all over the world that's going through Mexico and coming into the U.S. So we're seeing that there's a population shift in the people who are crossing the border, and that is what the crisis is right here.
Okay, so you have people from all over the world fly to Mexico to cross the border that way. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, because they know that you can more easily cross the border that way.
It's a lot of reasons, right? They can't get into Canada, for one, right? Mexico has a much more lenient immigration policy, so people could get visas, people could get into Mexico much easier, and then they take a bus and they go throughout the entire Mexico and then get to the border. That trip itself is very difficult. It's very long, and it's life-threatening in many ways, but it's still better than the conditions of their home country. And so, yes, they go through Mexico.
So what percentage of these people seeking refugee status or seeking asylum do you think are actually telling the truth?
I don't have the statistics on that. I want to say the asylum denial rate, but then the thing is, you can also claim asylum when you fly into the U.S., right? You don't have to just cross the border. So we don't, well, I mean, at least I don't have these statistics showing southern border entry migrants, how many of their cases are approved or denied, and then by nationality and by race. Like, I don't have that breakdown. It's just overall asylum applications. And also, it's backward looking, right? The statistics that we have about asylum adjudication, approval, or denials, and the preliminary and final merits, we're talking about, decades ago, right? It's kind of like, the light that we're seeing from the stars, that star might have already burned out, that kind of idea. It's delayed. So it's really hard to give a very specific point, because people can also file asylum and refugee claim after flying into the U.S., right?
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But I get just your general impression, because I haven't really met many of these migrants. I haven't been to the U.S.-Mexico border, so I haven't really seen it for myself, But like, do you get the impression like, no, these people are fleeing persecution?
You might be surprised. So a lot of people that you meet and know might have applied for asylum, but they don't look like they have applied for asylum, right? You just thought, oh, they're just like another international student, or they're just like anybody else who's here. They speak English fluently, but in their immigration history, they actually have applied for asylum at one point or other, and that's how they got their status. Not to spotlight the kitchen, right? In restaurants, but a lot of people. I mean, and this is just if you come into the country and you have no one to hire you, one of the easiest ways to find a job, to put food in your stomach, is to work in the kitchen, to work for restaurants or the restaurant industry, and to work at farms, because those are some of the greatest needs for where there's a labor shortage. So if you go there, you will find a lot of different people who have applied asylum, and they will tell you their stories, right? And now, whether or not they really were persecuted, I think that's kind of what you're asking, right? You're asking, how easy is it to fake it? You're asking, were they really persecuted? Should they be granted? That's hard to say, but I could tell you our asylum process, it's so long, and one of the reasons why it's so long is sort of almost to use that as a test, right? The United States Immigration Services, as well as the embassy, one of the ways in their toolkit to test if somebody is telling the truth is just with the power of time. Do I know a marriage is real or not? Do I know if an asylum claim is real or not? Well, if you are going to be willing to suffer the shame and the difficulty of waiting for years and years for your green card and filing all these extensions and going to multiple interviews and have officers inspect your life completely and show up at your house randomly to do fraud checks. If you're willing to undergo that treatment, more likely than not, your case is true. Well, of course, you still have to have substantive documents to prove this is who I am, this is what I suffered. It's on account of my race, religion, sexual orientation, and my beliefs. And that's why I'm fleeing persecution. And here's some documents to prove it. But if somebody's fleeing persecution, they're not, sitting down and writing like an essay and collecting 500 exhibits like other types of immigration cases, right? They are literally just packing up their bags and leaving. So naturally, they don't have that much. So during the interview, does an officer believe the person who's telling that truth? Now, somebody can fake it. They can take acting classes. So it's really hard to tell, but that's why the U.S. immigration system is almost set up this way, where it's by the length of time. And then if you, God forbid, commit a crime of some sort, well, then we deport you, right? And so you work here, we give you the work permit, you pay taxes, you improve our economy. But the moment you do anything wrong, we deport you. If after years and years, you've proven yourself to be a good person, you paid all these taxes, you did all these things. I mean, this is not like officially on the books, right? But it's like, if you've done all of this and then you do well at the interview, okay, fine, we'll give you a green card. That's almost the logic of it.
I see. That's interesting. Okay. So going back to the border issue, how do we get control of it? Are you recommending that we build a wall, or you don't think a wall is going to be effective, or?
I see that wall a lot, right? And you can easily climb the wall as well. I mean, because there's not a wall, it's a stick, right? And so there's a lot of ways to get over it. And also, you block one entrance. Unless you build an entire wall all the way across. And also, it's pretty crazy what the process that they go through. So I don't know if the wall will solve that problem. It might slow down a little bit, just a little bit, right? Because it's like, oh, the normal entry is gone. Okay, now I have to find another entry. And then once they find another entry, then you kind of go for it. And again, right, it's not against the law to claim asylum, right? I mean, if you build this wall, then you're almost directly saying to the rest of the world, we're not taking asylum seekers, and that kind of goes against the whole idea of this humanitarian policy that we have for asylum seekers. So there's just a lot of different problems. The new CBP app, they've been touting, the Custom Border Protection Agency has been touting, you get on it, you fill out your application, and they process it a lot faster. You wait for your appointment, and then you come in. That'll make things a lot better for you, a lot more smooth. They just rolled that out last year, right? They literally spent millions of dollars creating this crazy fast app in a short amount of time for a federal government to be able to launch that, and so that the process could be much smoother. But these are people fleeing persecution. They might not even have a phone or access to a computer, right? And so the app may only solve a portion of the solution of the problem. One of the ideas that I really like is to just solve two problems at once. And so the United States obviously has a major labor shortage for all sorts of industries, right? From farmers to the kitchen. And if you look across the United States, there's so many vacant land that needs to be developed. There are plenty of major investors who want to invest money into the United States so that they can get green cards. And the U.S. government needs these cities and spaces to be developed. It's like three problems all at once if you just linked them together, right? If you have these investors, entrepreneurs, people who are into the nonprofit sector, if you link them with these migrant refugees who are seeking asylum and who are willing to work and able to work, and they have all sorts of, because these are not just uneducated people. Some of these are engineers and doctors and lawyers and head chefs from their home country, right? It's just now their skill set is a mismatch in the U.S. marketplace. But once you empower them, they can easily create a thriving space. And so if there's a way to make that link, you're just a good project manager from the federal government is able to make that link. They come in, they invest, and nonprofit support, and a city is built out, and new companies are built out, and a new economic force that's able to propel the U.S. to the next great height. I think that would be a great solution, and no one is doing that.
Okay, so then would that solution mean getting rid of work permits? Or do you think we need work permits?
You definitely need work permits, or else they cannot legally work. So speeding up the work permit is one process. Getting practitioners to help them so that they can process it faster is one thing. Getting these refugees' skill set, match it with the U.S. marketplace is another very key important thing that nobody does, right? Well, I mean, some nonprofits do, but not at the scale that we're talking about. And also, there's a language barrier, right? Every year, millions and millions of people are coming in, but they're not all just speaking Spanish, right? And so these are people from all over the world now. And so maybe you have a nonprofit organization, but they're funded by volunteers and they don't speak the language. So how do you actually communicate with them to help them get a job and improve their resume and teach them the American way of applying? And it's a numbers game, and you have to weigh in to go to the interview, all sorts of stuff, right? The American capitalistic society that we live in is very different from a lot of these other countries. So teaching them, giving them an orientation. Well, you know what? There is no orientation, right? They literally come in, I'm seeking asylum. Great. Now just walk the streets, like figure out how to survive. That is sort of our system. So if we have a better orientation system that teaches them, that empowers them, but who's going to fund that resource? If we have more practitioners that's able to help them to get a work permit faster, if we have investors that's able to be linked with them and create a program so that investors who invest, they can get a green card, and then these migrant workers who work, that they can get a work permit, and then asylum application and immigration judges can adjudicate their case faster. And who do you think, these migrant and refugee seekers, who do you think they want to help the most? One is for, of course, themselves, but then it's their kin, right? So basically allow them a path to come in, help themselves, and then help their next of kin, right? Let the migrants help the migrants. They come in, they create jobs, they create a business, and then they hire other people, and they create a business, and then you have a police force, and then you hire them, and then they go police their own, right? The U.S. is not in a place with a lack of land. There's there's so much potential for the United States, and there's so many refugees. If you are able just to solve this particular problem, solve one problem with another problem, and it actually might be a good match. So that's sort of what I'm thinking, but it takes, from everything I know about state and federal government, just getting government agencies to work with each other is nearly impossible, let alone we're talking about federal, state, and other countries, and also investors, and granting multiple green cards all at once. But I think that would be a good solution. And, right now, given the stalemate, given the crisis, the traditional way of solving things hasn't been working. Well, it's time for another method, right?
So I guess I'm wondering about a more fundamental issue. Okay, like why can't we just get rid of the need for work permits? Like, well, what purpose does that serve?
Prior to the immigration law that changed in the 1980s, there wasn't even this concept of undocumented workers. I mean, if you zero back even further, California and Texas belong to what country? Belong to Mexico, right? The land is literally Mexico's land, and their people come and work, and this was their land. But once we took it over, still a lot of people came in and worked and went back, right? And there was just this free flow of people working, and then we created a more clear system where this is our border, and then you have to get authorization to come in, and if you stay here illegally for too long, then we kick you out. You can never come back, and you have to apply for a waiver. They created that kind of system. But if you get rid of the work permit and go back in the day, well, I think the Department of Labor would immediately file amicus briefs and say that will destroy the U.S. economy, right? All of the U.S. workers would lose their jobs because companies would just hire everybody for a cheaper price because people would just fly in and work, and U.S. would just be less competitive. That is the theory, whether you buy it or not.
Oh, I see. So the function is to protect American workers from foreign workers who are willing to do the same work but for less money.
Yes, that is a huge part of the problem with immigration.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this issue, I feel like there's just so many aspects to it, because there's definitely like a philosophical aspect, right? There's like a vision aspect too that's connected to it, right? Which is, what type of country do we want to live in? What kind of country do we want America to be? Supposedly, it's the land of immigrants, right? Or the land of descendants of immigrants. And so if we want to keep continuing with that reputation and with that status, right, you think that we have to be welcoming to those who are being persecuted. And honestly, like, it's almost like, I feel like it's even more important to be friendly to those who are seeking refugee status, right? Because there are multiple reasons why people emigrate, and maybe you just think your life will be better, in America, even though your life is not that bad in your home country, right? That's one thing. But if you're being persecuted for your sexual orientation, I feel like that's way worse. And so because they suffer such a grave injustice, I feel like we almost should prioritize those people.
Yep. The immigration system that we have now definitely does not prioritize those people. I can tell you that.
I guess I just don't see this problem being fixed. This is one problem, but it's a symptom of these larger issues. And one of the larger issues that you stated was like the quality of life, the conditions in their home countries. Like, why are these people even being persecuted to begin with, right? Like, if all we have to do is just change their countries and their governments and their political leaders, right? It's like, if that's a solution, it's like, okay, well then that's
Right.
never going to be fixed. Or at least, like, I don't think we can do that, right?
Right. And should we even, right? That kind of brings us back to colonialism, right? Like, we have a better system, so let us teach you how to run your government. And in a lot of ways, that's not, we've learned from history that that's not actually the best idea. So, but, nonetheless, if they run their country poorly and the people are fleeing and they're human beings, your brothers and sisters, do you not help them? Do you not welcome them? Well, we definitely are not welcoming them right now. But do we even, they're at your doorsteps, right? They are literally in your home. They're holding their baby and they're starving. Do you not feed them? That is the situation we're in, right? And so it's hard. It's a very hard discussion, and it takes a lot of political will, and it's going to take a lot of political compromise and a lot of everybody working together. And I feel like the real solution, the only solution, is when you just have two problems that are both very severe, but they solve each other's problem, and you have somebody that can organize it and meet it all at once. I feel like that is the only thing. And this refugee crisis that we are facing with the influx of people coming in, that is to another country a blessing. What, you have millions of people willing to go to your country to find shelter and work, whereas their country, their population is declining, everybody's getting older, and their, country is just going to cease to exist after a few more decades, whereas many people are coming in. Like, it's a blessing in a way, right? And so, like, what are you complaining about, so that's sort of the thing that politicians have to really think about. There are plenty of nonprofit organizations that are all trying to help, but they're all at their limits. There's plenty of immigration practitioners that are helping, but they're also at their limits. And so it's a very, very difficult situation. But I think if we get this right, it will pave the way for the next decade, if not like hundreds of years for the U.S.
So one of the thoughts that keep coming to me is libertarianism. The libertarians that I know are pretty pro-immigration, right? And they basically don't really like government, right? They think the smaller the government, the better, kind of. And a lot of them, when they talk about immigration, they're just like, look, it's a private matter. It's a contract between the immigrant and the business. There are plenty of businesses who would love to hire migrants because they can pay them less, right? And there are plenty of migrants who want to come in and work. So why doesn't the government just kind of step out the way? And then the response to that is kind of like what we mentioned earlier, which is that maybe the U.S. government has to prioritize and protect American workers. And so since we prioritize us, they are going to have to suffer. And they're just going to have to wait. And they're just going to have to be homeless. Now, we don't want them to be homeless. We don't want them on the street. But we also have these practical issues, right? Like, just the legal system is just so backed up. And it's going to take so long for them to get the work permit. But it's kind of like an unavoidable problem if we want to prioritize American workers.
Yeah, well, the first thing that the libertarians and anybody who have that mentality should know is if the U.S. and all the private businesses can just hire anybody and anybody could get a work permit, um, I mean, maybe 70% of the United States workforce would probably be obsolete or would change, right? Think about so many people and so many jobs, so other people who are fleeing persecution. You're complaining about a 40-hour, shift. I gladly work 80 hours, right, for the same pay. So Americans and the American way of life, essentially, right? What we are used to, the benefits that we are trying to bargain for, all the unions, poof, right? Because the supply and demand would just dictate that you guys are not willing to work as hard and you guys are not as, we're able to work as smart as these other people. So the businesses will just hire them. They make a lot more profits. That's going to fundamentally change the United States fabric and the way of life. And do we want that? The answer is probably no, not exactly. So where is the balance? Right now, there's a crazy amount of people who are unemployed, right? There's a lot of tech workers who have been laid off and a lot of people who cannot get any jobs. If the immigration system were to just easily grant work permits, that problem will be compounded like tenfold. And so if people only knew how much the U.S. government already subsidized their ability to get a job, right? You are already empowered. You are already on the front of the line to get a job compared to so many other people who want that job. If people only knew that, right? That's the craziest thing that I feel like most people don't understand. The fact that they have a green card, they're a U.S. citizen, they're here, they can't even, they could even get an interview. Like they are already at the very front. If the government is already putting in lots and lots of obstacles before other people have to pay tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes they have to wait years and some cases decades in order to be able to get that work permit just so that they can come in and try to get to be your assistant essentially, right? So it's pretty crazy that's what most people don't realize.
No, we're definitely lucky in comparison to the vast majority of the world. Do you know if there were a limited number of work permits that are issued every year? Is that part of the problem too?
There's no limit on work permits per se. There's limits for certain visas, and certain visas grant work permits. But let's say you get married to a U.S. citizen or you're seeking asylum and then you get your work permit processed. Well, there's some unlimited amount of those, but it's just the how fast the printer can print, right? And that there's a limit there. And so there's some limits, and then there's others that don't have limits, but it's just the overall processing of the work permits.
Do you think that there should be a limit placed on how many asylum seekers that we accept?
That kind of goes contrary to the spirit of the law, right? Right. Imagine a doctor who swears the oath and says, but I'm only willing to give you a blood transfusion. I can't do anything other, more surgery because, my time is booked. So, I mean, if you want to help, where are you going to limit that?
I don't know. This is just the impression that I get from people who are, who are more concerned about the immigration issue, is that they're making certain assumptions about the psychology of the people who are trying to come in, or their motivations, right? Like how Trump Trump has said some like pretty like unfavorable things about immigrants. I suspect many people share his sentiments, right? Like where, the immigrants that we're getting, it's not going to be the educated class. It's going to be the poor and the disadvantaged. And those aren't really the type of immigrants that we want in this country. The type of immigrants that we want are those that are highly trained and highly educated, right? We want the doctors, we want the engineers. We don't want necessarily like the person who's only done like physical labor perhaps, right? Or maybe other sectors of our economy actually do want those people, because Americans do like the people who will work on farms and pick fruit, right? Apparently Americans don't want to do that for that, because the labor is just like backbreaking.
That's right. Yeah. So, but that goes against the policy of asylum seekers, right? We create this law because we want we want to be the type of country and the type of people that will welcome somebody who is fleeing persecution. It's not because then we're almost judging them, right? Like, oh, you are fleeing persecution. Oh, but you're a doctor fleeing persecution, so we'll welcome you. Oh, you are just, a random person, or you're uneducated, or you're too young to be of any good, or you're too old to be of any good. So we will persecute you by not even allowing you in. That goes completely contrary to the American spirit and that law, right? We welcome anybody who is fleeing persecution. Now, after we welcome you, do we have a system to help you, to embolden you, to provide you with the resources so that you can benefit the United States? That's a separate question, which, I think the United States is very, very good at, right? We are very, very good at taking somebody who is willing to work hard and providing them with ample resources to make them thrive. At least the marketplace technically should be able to do that. Right. And if you're willing to work hard, you can make that American dream happen. That, I think, is the system that we've had, and we've been successful at it for many, many years, but it's just slowly having, a breakdown. And right now it's a crisis because the numbers are peaking and the system itself cannot handle it.
So yeah, in a sense, it's almost like the motivations, like on our part, have to be different, right? Depending on what type of immigrants we're talking about. So perhaps for some immigrants, the motivations are selfish in nature. It's like, no, we want these people because we want these engineers to create stuff that, that are going to improve our quality of life, right? So then it's mainly about us. But for asylum seekers, it should be about them, right? The question is, how can we benefit from you being here, right? That's the wrong question for asylum seekers.
That's correct. And that's how law is. Right. And when you go through law school, you realize laws are contradictory because in family law, you're taught this theory. But then suddenly when it comes to contracts, that theory is invalidated. And law is just messy because when you're with the lawmakers, right, Congress and philosophers, when they think about it, sometimes they think of it in a vacuum, but they didn't realize that when it's applied in another situation, it's completely different. And so it's not like physics, at least elementary physics, where it's just going to be completely universal. So when we came up with the asylum law, when we adopted the international conventions, the idea is we want to welcome those who are fleeing persecution. But then when we create, the business visas and immigrant, though, then to get even those green cards, you have to prove that you will substantially benefit the national interest. And so, but those two underlying frameworks of why we created it is completely different. And they are adjudicated differently. And when people talk about immigration and when they confuse the two, that is a lack of understanding.
So do you think that those who are skeptical, maybe perhaps on the more like conservative side, do you think that they're just mistaken because they're applying that same mentality to all immigrants?
Yes and no. Immigration is extremely complex. And even if they are the misunderstanding of the situation, the problem still remains, right? The practical problem still remains. Millions of people are here coming in. That the population, again, it's the entire population of Chicago coming in every single year. And we don't have enough resources to do their background check. We don't have enough resources to give them work permits. Where are they going? What are they doing? And could this be a national security issue? We don't have enough housing for them. Like, it's a real problem, regardless of your philosophical leanings. What do we do? And there's multiple solutions and proposals, but there's no one easy fix.
Yeah, so everybody acknowledges that there is a problem, right? And so that's not where the disagreement is. The disagreement is what you do about this problem, which stems from like fundamental differing visions of what we want the United States to be, right? So maybe for the the liberals, right, the Democrats, they'll say, yeah, this is a problem, but it's better that we're experiencing this problem than not experiencing this problem if what that means is that we're just rejecting these asylum seekers.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think it's a good place to wrap things up. Thank you so much for being here.
Love talking to you, Jason.